In the United States, 1 of every 4 girls and 1 of every 6 boys are sexually abused. 20 million Americans living now were victims of parental incest as children. Child pornography is one of the fastest growing internet businesses ever by 150% each year. More than 120,000 kids were sexually abused by the Catholic Church alone. $4.5 million public school students have experienced sexual assault or rape at their school. And here in America, more than 1.3 million children are sexually abused by someone every year. Up to or more than 500,000 child molesters are operating in the United States right now. The FBI says a sex offender lives in every square mile of this country. One in 10 men molest children, and 95% know who their abuser is because few are ever strangers. Their parents, step-parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends, neighbors, coaches, clergy, babysitters, and teachers. There are more than 60 million survivors of childhood sexual abuse. I am just one. My name is Cheri Roberts, and you're listening to Sickness of Silence.
Welcome to the show. We're sending out an SOS. Sickness of Silence is a special monthly series on Challenging the Rhetoric that was created to directly address this real pandemic of childhood sexual abuse that isn't just new now. It's been going on for decades and decades and centuries, I'm sure. And I'm sure that maybe one of our guests tonight on the panel can answer that and correct me, because I'm sure it's been going on for centuries. Fred, that one's for you. So here's the deal. We have to stop this, and we have to stop looking the other way and pretending it's not happening or it's not so prolific or somehow otherwise minimizing this problem, because a lot of people, if it hasn't happened to them or they don't directly know somebody it's happened to, like one of their own children or siblings, it's easy to minimize it if you're untouched by it. The other thing is that it's real easy to cringe. I know I get that reaction. I've had that reaction for many years when I try to talk about the things. I'm not poor meing it. I'm not looking for somebody to make me feel better. I'm looking for a constant, continuous conversation. So the series, it's a collaborative effort to create a continuous and candid dialogue with the public, because child sexual abuse is just not something to hush up about. And if we want to stop this pandemic and find a really impactful solution, then we have to talk about it. That's the problem. The disease is the silence. If we're talking about this and we make it everyday language in our homes and our lives, then those that are perpetuating these abuses are going to find a much harder time, because people are going to be so much more informed. So no matter how hard some of the information tonight is going to be to hear, you need to hear it. And then even harder, you need to share it. And you need to share it far and wide with your social media connections, with your friends, with your family. You need to talk with your family, not just your children, but your family. And your family needs to know that you've spoken with your children. So in case one of your family members, as you heard in the opening, it's rarely a stranger. In case one of your family members might be of that bent, and you're talking about this openly, they're going to think a little twice. They're going to know that eyes are on them, even if you aren't aware of them. This is the third roundtable in the series so far. I have a really great group of intelligent panelists that are joining us. Some are returning guests. Some are brand new to the SOS mic. We welcome them all. I'm sure that you're all just really going to enjoy might be an odd word for this topic, but I think that you're going to learn, if nothing else, and resonate with at least one of us on the panel. And that's why we're doing a panel, because we all have a different voice. We all have a different piece of this. And, we hope to connect with everybody out there. So before I start bringing all these wonderful people on, I have some show info to share, and this is going to help you participate. So I'm going to be tweeting and posting to the social media during the live show. You can follow on Twitter at CTR Newsfeed. It's CTR Newsfeed because, again, this is a series of my regular show called Challenging the Rhetoric. We use hashtag SOS for this series. You can find me on Facebook as well at facebook.com/sickness of silence. Please be sure to check out the website as well, sicknessofsilence.com or .org. Either works. I've got them both. And you can find a lot of informative articles that I write and some contributors write. And there is a bunch of resources there for families and survivors and even some for the pedophiles out there because we want them to stop it now, which is an organization you can link to on the site. I'm going to be taking callers tonight, so if you'd like to call in and participate, the number is 646-787-1790. The chat room is also live. The chat room can be found on blogtalkradio.com/Challenging the Rhetoric with Cheri Roberts. It's spelled CHERI. Right beneath that slider, the little slideshow there, if you scroll down underneath it, you'll find the chat room. If you're already logged in and you don't see a chat room, it is, in fact, live. I'm in there right now. Hit your refresh button, and you'll see it. If you're listening to an archive, obviously you can't participate in the chat room and you can't call in. But if you are listening live, we would love the participation. Just please be respectful to everybody here. It's a really hard topic, and there's a lot of people whose reputations and integrity and feelings and lives are on the line for being so brave. So, okay, let's get down to this right now and start bringing everything on so we can get to the business of saving some kids. The first person I'm bringing on, and I'm going to bring all the panelists on kind of right in a row, so as I bring you on, say hello, but then I'm going to move on and bring the next one on. I always bring on Sue Shugarts first. Sue is the social media manager for Sickness of Silence, hashtag SOS. She does a lot of the social media for me, not just for SOS, but also for Challenging the Rhetoric. She does a lot of really cool things. She can be very helpful. If you have questions and you're listening and you don't want to call in, she is in the chat room. You can direct them to her, and she will shoot me a private message to make sure I'm aware of those. Sue, welcome back.
Hi, Cheri. It's good to be back. Okay, I'm really looking forward to the show tonight. Yes, it is.
You know, I'm getting more and more excited, Sue. Every month that we do this, I'm getting more and more excited because not that this topic is like such, great joy or anything, but the fact that we're able to talk about this in such a reasonable and logical manner is wonderful. I just appreciate you. On that note, Sue, I'm going to go ahead and bring... Thank you. I'm going to bring Michael Skinner on. Michael Skinner is also a regular panelist with SOS. He's a really great person, first and foremost. This man's story breaks my heart every time I hear it. This man was abused starting from infancy. He has just been a champion as an adult. He's a phenomenal musician, and he does some really great healing music as well as part of his repertoire. He's a keynote speaker. He's an educator of his own right on the topic. He's just a wonderful guy. Michael, welcome back to SOS.
Hi, folks. Wow. I'm overwhelmed with what you just said. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Well, I am overwhelmed with the person that you are, and the more I get to know you over the months, Michael, I am just amazed. The sustenance of spirit, there is no better word for it, the sustenance of spirit that you have and you carry with you in your adult world after what you have faced is something that all people, no matter what they've went through in life, can certainly learn from, for sure.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us again. I'm going to go straight now to one of the experts on the panel. This is going to, the terminology child pornography is the terminology we have to use because that's, if you study it like I do and hope not to be red flagged by the feds for doing so, you're going to be looking things up to do with child porn. It really is abuse imagery. These are crime scene photos. But Frederick Lane, who is a regular panelist here, he was also on my regular show last night, and we kind of went deep into the whole sex industry, the internet sex industry thing, including with regards to children last night. And I'll link in the chat room, I'll link last night's show for those that are interested. Frederick Lane, like I said, is a regular guest here. He is an expert in cybercrime forensics, an expert in pornography, particularly child pornography. He's also an author, has written many, many books, including books to do with educator abuse within schools, like Cyber Traps for Educators. Fred, thank you so much for coming back again. I love having you.
Cheri, it's a real privilege to participate. Thank you for having me on.
I appreciate it. And it's funny, I sit here and I'm like looking through my numbers and trying to, because there's all kinds of phone numbers lit up in the call queue, and I got to pick each one of you out and make sure I'm bringing the right person on. I'm going to go straight over to Michelle Forbes. This is her second time on the panel. Michelle Forbes is a former legal assistant. She currently runs a daycare. She is a survivor also of sexual abuse by a teacher. And I believe, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that her actual abuse started with this teacher when she was 14 years old. And if you listened last month to the panel, you know that went after she actually finished school, and she lived with this teacher for some years. Michelle, thank you so much for coming back to Sickness of Silence.
Hello, Cheri. Thanks for having me back. Hello, everybody.
Hey, Michelle.
Good to have you. Well, Michelle, I hope that you and Fred, as well as Andrew Clemens, a former panelist who will be back again from KidSafe Foundation, I hope that you guys kind of network, and that's one of the points in doing this, whether you're listening or you're on the panel, is that we can figure out how we can help each other because we all have the same goal. So I think that there's, especially dealing with the educators, as you guys do, that's really great. I'm going to jump on over to bring the next panelist in, and she is new to the SOS mic. I found Tina just recently. Her name, I hope I don't slaughter her name. It's a Scottish last name. Her name is Tina McCulloch, I believe, and she's a doll maker. She makes collector's dolls. They're quite beautiful to most people. To some people, they find them a little creepy because they are so very, very realistic. But there is a market for these dolls in the regular world, but unbeknownst to Tina, until she started getting, hit by all of this, is there's obviously a market for these sorts of very realistic children-style dolls in the pedophile market, because there is a company called Trotla, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, that specifically makes child dolls for pedophilia, allegedly with the hope of stopping them from actually harming a child, whether they help stop harm a child or they make it to the point where they just need the real thing. We'll talk about that on the show. But Tina's case is a little bit different because her dolls have nothing to do with that. And if you just do a search, whether you're looking for dolls or if you're looking for something on what we're talking tonight, you're going to find her, as I did, and her story just broke my heart. Tina, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Cheri. And it's McCulloch that you did fairly well, so you got
not too bad. Not too bad. Well, there's something else besides just talking about your dolls. There's something else that is worth mentioning to the listening audience here, and that is that you have 2 master's degrees. One is in behavioral science, and the other is social work. You've also been a foster parent to children that are suffering a lot of the types of trauma that we're going to be discussing tonight. So I think that you, as we discussed previously before the show, I think that you are going to be able to interject and speak on lots of things here tonight, and everybody's kind of little piece of this is really important to this puzzle. So truly, I really appreciate you. Tina, I'm going to jump over and bring on our final panelist tonight. And this final panelist, I am just thrilled to have connected with her. I say friend loosely, but somebody that follows me on Twitter had talked to me about truckers helping fight child trafficking and human trafficking in general. And I was fascinated, and I started searching into it, and I came across Truckers Against Trafficking. And Lynn Thompson, who is the actual founder of that, and her daughters are more than highly involved in this nonprofit, this 501c3 nonprofit organization that is highly sponsored, obviously, within the trucking industry, Peterbilt and all that sort of stuff. But she herself is she's a PR specialist. And if you go to the Truckers Against Trafficking site, which is being posted right now, and I'll link it up again here in a minute, and she can give you I think it's .com, but it's pretty amazing what they've accomplished thus far. So, Lynn, thank you for coming on.
Hi, Cheri. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a little bit intimidating with this kind of a panel. You guys are amazing people, and I'm over here in trafficking, not an expert in child abuse, but it's a thrill to be here with you and to be able to learn more.
Well, Lynn, I want the listener to know that we are all, and maybe it's perceived I have an ego because I'm the host of the show, but we are all very humble in what our piece is in this. And you've done such amazing things, Lynn. And what I want to do is I want to jump first into child trafficking. When we get a little further into the show, in the latter half of the show, we're going to talk about human trafficking in general because it's not just kids. But I'm gonna pass the mic to you for a minute, Lynn. And if I got any of your credentials or something I missed wrong, please do fill in the audience. But I want you to kind of address child trafficking, and so the listener knows. Lynn started doing a ministry a while back in about 2009 is when she started doing this because human trafficking was part of what she was bringing awareness to, but she saw a real need here, and she was smart. Truckers are the eyes and ears on the road. So, Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about those numbers?
Sure. We actually started the ministry, my 4 daughters and a friend and I started a ministry called Chapter 61 Ministries in 2007. In 2009, we heard a speaker talk about helping people at a local gas station to learn more about the signs of human trafficking and what to do if they saw it. Because lots of traffickers are continually moving their victims all over the United States so that they can't be found, so that they are never really cognizant of where they are. And so when I heard the speaker talk about that, I thought back to my own childhood. My parents owned a small motel in El Paso, Texas, and truckers were one of our main customer bases. And so in 2009, I thought, you know what, if we could mobilize 7 million people in an industry that large across the United States, they would really play a critical role in helping to fight human trafficking. It's really hard to put numbers on human trafficking because oftentimes police forces are not trained on human trafficking across the United States, so they might pick up someone and charge them with prostitution because they don't understand that this person is being prostituted. And so and then those cases might be tried for child abuse or child exploitation or child molestation rather than human trafficking because you don't have a prosecutor who is trained to prosecute human trafficking cases. So it's really hard to put those numbers on. But if I were to go to a particular database organization that we use and they were to give me a year's worth of data on any state in the union for unique back page ads just for prostituted kids or prostituted people, those ads for each state would be between 150 and 250,000 per year per state. That is a huge number, and that's just talking about on the Internet. Then you have trafficking that's taking place where kids and adults are being sold all over the United States, and it's not on the Internet. So it's a huge, huge crime.
It is a huge crime, and I got to share with you because you and I haven't been able to speak about this, Lynn. But Frederick Lane was on my show last night, and he's a regular panelist here, and we were talking about you after you and I connected, and he was very happy that I was bringing you on, and I'm going to bounce it over to him because he told me that child trafficking in the United States and elsewhere, but child trafficking is one of the biggest sources of child pornography. Fred, can you address that?
Sure, absolutely.
Sherry. Oh, and I'm sorry, Fred, I'm sorry, if you can pause. Yes. To the listeners, I just want to let the listeners know we are aware that we are experiencing some weird static feedback, and we're going to try to fix that and address that. But so the listeners know, all of us are in different places, and we're doing this remotely, and some of us are in very rural places using, signals that are not quite as strong. So bear with any sound issues because the topic and the show is very important. Fred, go ahead.
Sure. Cheri, I think that your summary of it is absolutely correct, that there's a very tight connection between the child trafficking phenomenon and the increase in the amount of child pornography that is available online. And obviously the Internet is a foundational factor in both of those things. I mean, you just heard Lynn talking about the role of Backpage.com, Craigslist, before they got rid of some of their more egregious advertisements, was a big part of that. In the United States, obviously, you're feeding into these secret networks of collectors. The FBI is very active in trying to uncover some of the stuff that's on the dark web, the hidden chatroom-driven child pornography clubs that are out there. Around the world, you're seeing the quote-unquote demand for these kinds of visual materials tied into the child trafficking phenomenon in a couple of different ways. Obviously, you've got people who are abusing kids by taking their photos, but then also the flip side of it, using the child pornography itself as a lure for victims of trafficking, as a way of grooming them into a vulnerable situation, and then they get carried across national lines or even international lines.
Lynn, I'm going to go right back to Lynn, and then I'm going to, still be talking about the other panelists. I mean, bringing them in on this, but I really want to kind of zero in on this for a minute. Lynn, with child trafficking, I know that typically the general age is about 11, 12 years old to 14 for children. But I'm curious, in the research that you've done, how many infants and toddlers are being trafficked for sex purposes?
Again, it would be
not
really hard to quantify. Yeah, it's impossible to quantify that. But what I can tell you is that 65 to 95% of children who are exploited and prostituted were sexually abused as children. Sexually abused children are extremely vulnerable to traffickers. They are able to, if you talk to traffickers, they'll tell you that they can look at a playground and they can pick out exactly who they can get and how they can get them, what manipulative means, what things they need to say. And they do a major grooming process where sometimes with a child that it'll take several months. Sometimes they'll even go with a teenager up to a year, just grooming them, getting them ready before they spring the trap and they begin to traffic them. Stories like a 11-year-old girl who came from a home where her mother was alcoholic. She was not sexually abused, but she wanted a Barbie doll. Her mom wouldn't pay for it. They were pretty well off. She took a train into Manhattan, got lost in New York looking for FAO Schwartz, and ended up somebody decided he was going to help her, and she was out on the street being trafficked that night. So those kind of things take place. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Lynn, you pointed out something that cannot be stressed enough to the audience. The first roundtable panel I did in November was it was ironic that, here I had prepared all this stuff, and all of a sudden, Jared Fogle, the subway dude, and all of that going on hit the news in a big way. And in the phone calls between him and the reporter that he was grooming himself as his girlfriend, he was telling her how to choose a child, and he was telling her, look for the one that is from the broken home, look for the one that's quiet, or, all of those different things. So the same stands for not just trafficking, because the person that actually snatches that child, trafficking, is not necessarily the person that's going to do any abuse on the child. They're making money. This is a job for them. They may or may not abuse them, but they're looking for specific traits, the same way that pedophiles and child molesters are looking for certain traits. I'm going to go right over to Michelle. Michelle, her situation, as I said in the opening, was with a teacher at school. Michelle, talk about grooming for a minute.
Mine was a professional groomer. He started with, I didn't make the cheerleading squad my freshman year, so that was an opening for him to asked me if I wanted to do secretarial duties for him. And he made me feel very special and, told me how pretty I was all the time and what great legs I had and offered to, let me come to his office whenever I needed a confidant. And he just kept that up for probably about a year, isolating me, every day at lunch. And finally, once he had groomed me for long enough, he felt like he could, move it further into something sexual. I was 15 the first
and
time.
You were 14, sexual. Correct? You were 14 years old?
I was 14 when the grooming started. I was 15 the first time he did something sexual to me.
Right. Okay, so Sue, you were 8 years old, I believe, if I'm correct, when a neighbor started grooming you. Can you talk on the grooming process with the neighbor real quick?
Yeah, I was kind of an isolated kid. Even though I had a big family, I was the youngest, and we had a lot of teenagers around that kind of left me out. But he preyed upon all of that, not just for an 8-year-old. It wasn't so much about pretty. It was about smart. It was about listening to you. It was like, oh, you're so creative and all these things. And it went on for, probably about a month or so before, the touching started and those kind of things started. So, yeah, I do know a lot about the grooming part of it and how it starts so small and so innocuous, and how quickly it can go into the abuse.
Okay, so I want to go over to Michael now, because, Michael, your abuse started in infancy, so you didn't have that same kind of grooming process that we're talking about. Now, it doesn't mean that abusers in latter years of your childhood didn't do some grooming of their own, but your family, because of the involvement that they had within the church and pedophile rings and stuff like that, it was a given that you were fodder for them. So, Michael, can you speak on anything that you experienced with regards to actually grooming?
No, I just think I was, human chattel to be pawned off. There was no grooming. It was just, here's the situation. You're going to do what we've told you to do, and nope.
Yeah, that's the thing, and that's why I said everybody has a unique voice in this, and every experience is different, not just with the panelists, and not every panelist here tonight is a survivor, like myself and Sue and Michael and Michelle. Fred and Lynn and Tina, to my knowledge, are not survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and but their input is still valid because they are a part of creating solutions. And so I want to jump over real quick and to Tina, because Tina, having had foster kids in her home that had experienced these sorts of traumas, Tina, what was your experience with helping in the healing process of these kids and showing them love, especially while you're making children's dolls and all of that and dealing with what you're dealing with on the outside of that, and we will get into that deeply. But Tina, did any of the children that you fostered, did they talk about some of these things? And obviously I don't want you to disclose names and intricacies, but go ahead.
The first child we ever had was 15 years old, and she had been raped by her father on a daily basis almost from the time she was about 9. And this had been going all that time from 9 to 15. When we got her, she was a mess, of course, and had a lot of behaviors that we didn't understand. That's actually why my husband and I went on and got our master's in behavioral science, because we didn't know how to help her. The foster care system gives you some support, but really does not prepare you for the extent of the behaviors that you're seeing. It was heartbreaking. I mean, it was totally heartbreaking, because how could you do this to a child and your own child?
Yeah, seriously. And, with your studies that you've done, with the degrees that you have, how even if you had never fostered a child, Tina, and even if you've never experienced this personally in your life yourself or someone you know and love, what did your training in the behavioral sciences, what did that show you about human nature in general, whether it has to do with the pedophile or the victim or somebody that's completely detached from all of this? How do we bring that all together for any kind of an effective solution from the mentality standpoint of it? And you may or may not be able to answer that, not to put you on the spot, but if anybody can, it might be you.
I would say from all of it that it's very damaging, and it has lifelong lasting effects. And you can reach a child, get to them, put them through therapy, remove the abuse or whatever it takes. But it has very long-reaching effects, and affects their relationships. It affects the way they live their lives. The jobs they hold, just every aspect of their lives, their own child rearing. So it's very devastating because it goes on, and it has an impact that it's just so damaging to that child for the rest of their life. And
I was going to say there's a new study that just came out that I posted on Sickness of Silence Facebook fan page, and I'll relink that after the show because I don't want to get distracted by it right now and trying to search it up. But there was a new study that just came out this week, and it was really talking about the psychological damage of trauma in children, and a brand new study, and it was really great because it actually spoke on things a little more fluently that address the modern world. And I think that's one of the reasons that Fred and I have been able to connect so well on this topic is that because he's a cybercrime forensics guy, cyber forensics, we're talking computer technology and technology in general, which is speaking my language. And I think that when we're looking at solutions to problems, because we're looking at problems that are so long, brewing, that we're not taking technology into the picture and how to effectively create some sort of change. So I have a two-part question for Lynn and Fred, and that is, first, Lynn, from your perspective with Truckers Against Trafficking in the United States, okay, let's talk in the United States specifically right now for this, about how many children are trafficked per year, Lynn, in the United States?
In the United States, while the numbers, again, are hard to come by based on how they prosecute cases, they have tried to quantify that somewhere between 100 to 300,000 people are trafficked every year, generally children.
Okay, so you said about 100,000. So let me let the listener know that every single day, at least 116,000 web searches for child pornography happen online. Fred, does that number ring true to you? Or is it bigger?
If anything, honestly, Cheri, I would say that seems low to me.
Yeah,
same for me, and anything I've ever read or come across.
Say that again?
Yeah, this is Michael. I would echo what Fred said. Anything that I've ever read or come across, I think that figure is low.
Yeah.
Badly.
I think the figure is low because I think a lot of times what happens is there's so many different people dabbling in surveying and that sort of thing, and everybody with good intent. The problem is because of this topic, having really true blue ironclad numbers that anybody can spout off are pretty much next to non-existent. But I like to take the figures that we have at hand, like Lynn presented. So, Fred, based on that kind of a figure, based on the Internet searches for child porn and what Lynn said about the child trafficking and stuff, and what you had said earlier with regards to child trafficking being one of the biggest contributors to child pornography, if we wiped out child trafficking, if we could somehow wipe out child trafficking in the United States, what kind of a percentage cut would happen with child pornography, just from the U.S.?
Cheri, that's a really fascinating question. It's a little bit
well,
speculative,
you know me.
Okay. Right. And I'm just going to lay out kind of an expert-based guesstimate, so don't take this to the bank, but I would guess that if you could effectively eliminate child trafficking in the United States, you would make a sadly small dent in the availability of child pornography. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. Number one, none of the content that is out there now goes away because of digitization. And as a matter of fact, you've got older material reappearing because people can now scan it or photograph it. A lot of the material that is produced within families. So technically the children are not being trafficked, but they are being sexually abused and sexually exploited. Actually, just as an aside, one of my initiatives this year is to develop a draft bill for the crime of electronic sexual assault, which would involve any non-consensual photograph or moving image of an individual, which would get to the voyeurism and so on and so forth. I think there's a real need for that at the federal level. Then, as an additional point, you've got all of these foreign sources of child pornography. You do have regions of the world, and I don't want to get all jingoistic and American-centric about this, but you do have portions of the world where there are very differing attitudes towards childhood, towards sexual relations, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you have these absolutely horrifying cases of these young girls dying as part of an arranged marriage in the Middle East, or obviously the unfathomable tragedy of Boko Haram, or what ISIS is doing. I mean, the state of protection for female children is just devastating. So, putting aside that, I mean, there's a lot of material that an effective ban on trafficking in the United States simply would not reach. So the upshot is, if you were able to make a dent of more than 5%, I'd be stunned.
Well, 5%, yeah, exactly. I mean, and that seems like a small, significant percentage, but when you tally up how many people 5% is out of that whole big picture, it's a lot, and I am willing. I'm sure everybody on the panel is willing.
Sure, Cheri, and if I can just jump in, let me be absolutely clear. Let's not say that 5% is not a victory if, in fact, you're preventing children from being trafficked. So there's an unmistakable positive good there, right? And then you can say, as the frosting on the cake, we're going to minimize, or we're going to cut down the percentage of child pornography out there. That is fabulous. There's no downside to that. It's just that getting rid of trafficking is not going to get rid of child pornography.
I would have to agree. I think we need to go to the root cause of where this is all coming from. Stop trafficking as best you can. But, Donna, we have to go when this first starts, because there's always going to be the flow of victims and the perpetrators until society really wants to tackle this. Abuse and all its forms.
Michael, I completely agree with you, Michael, and I think that we are we are for sure going to have a conversation tonight about some very real things that are highly distasteful for many, if not most, that can potentially be done at this point with technology. But before we go into that, I want to kind of switch gears for a minute, and I want to go over to Tina McCulloch right now, because I've asked her to have a thick skin, because she has been bombarded. This woman makes these collector dolls that are extremely real-life looking, okay? I mean, extremely. Some of them are just like freaky, so how real they look. And I would have never found this woman or her doll had I not been researching for SOS and researching for last night's Challenging the Rhetoric show and talking about sex dolls, and I've been researching prolifically about Trotla out of Japan and these dolls that they make that are way more realistic even than Tina's, that are anatomically correct even. They allegedly have zero kind of opening orifices, according to the owner and maker of those, because he says he's on tape for saying that, well, no, you don't do that to children. Okay, well, because I experienced it, and I think that Michael could probably speak on this to the extent that I can, because I was 3 and he was, an infant, so I think that we have this weird thing from the ages of how this works. But, these dolls that are out there are crazy, and this poor woman, Tina, that's on the show, her heart is in the right place, and I want to let the listener know, and Tina, forgive me, but Tina, about 8 years after beginning this process of making these collector dolls, actually lost her son in a car accident. And, there's a tribute to her son and that loss on her page. And I don't know, and she's probably going to answer this because I want to really get deep into these dolls and the technology behind it. But so please, I want everybody to have kid gloves with her. She has been bombarded, as I said, by pedophiles that want to buy her dolls. Tina, I really appreciate if you can chime in a little bit specifically about, and we need to be brief, but I want you to talk about how you came to make these dolls, how you make the dolls, and then I want to talk about customizing the dolls.
Okay. Well, I come from a long line of doll collectors. My mother collected, my grandmother collected, so it was kind of in my genes. It was something my mom and I did together. We actually started this business together, and it was a way of kind of feeding my collection myself, but also bringing in a little bit of money. We homeschooled our son, and it was a way I could be kind of a stay-at-home mom and bring in a little money too. And it was something I really enjoyed. We did it as a family. We actually did doll shows together. My son did not necessarily appreciate the dolls, being a boy, but I would point to the tennis shoes on his feet and say, see those? The dolls paid for those, so appreciate the dolls. But anyway, the dolls have a lot of purposes. I literally have mailed them all over the world. I have customers all over the world. I get orders from police and fire departments. They use them as training dolls for like car seat safety programs, which is really cool because kids can relate to, a doll that actually kind of looks like them. So they can customize them. They've used them in programs where they have like Hispanic kids or African American kids, and there are not a lot of toddler dolls that are ethnic, and I'm finding more and more that that's the case. So people appreciate being able to customize them according to the group that they're working with. So I also have sold several to movies. They use them as stand-ins for toddlers in movies because, lo and behold, toddlers do not hold still and do what you want them to do in a movie. So,
one of your dolls, Tina, one of your dolls, and I apologize for the listeners. I know we're still having static feedback. One of your dolls, Tina, was actually used in one of Adam Sandler's movies. Is that correct?
Right. It's been grown up.
That is how realistic your dolls are.
Yeah, there was the little boy, the African American toddler that's in that movie. They need to stand in for him because he was a live wire. So they used my doll to stand in for that little boy in that movie.
Well, when did you first discover? How long had you been doing this and been online that you discovered that there was a pedophilic market for these and they started bombarding you? And I don't say that tongue in cheek. I really don't. I'm highly disturbed and so glad I found you. I feel bad for you.
I've been doing this about 16 years, and I've had a website for probably 15 of that. My website is such that I can go in and check site stats and see what people are putting in for search words, keywords. And I noticed this probably a few years into it that I would get every once in a while someone would put in child sex doll or something like this. So I started trying to change my wording, and I would say choose your doll's gender instead of the word sex, thinking that would help. It didn't help. It gradually, it just got worse and worse. It got to the point where I just about could not stand to look at my my site stats because I felt like I needed to take a shower after I was done looking at them. I tried doing something like
Tina, I was going to say I completely understand that because I found you on a fluke because I was doing research on the child sex dolls. Now, I want to share with you, Tina, because I didn't know this until last night, but Frederick Lane, doing show prep for last night's show, actually came across you for the same reasons that I did because he was researching the sex dolls. And, I mean, there's no question to somebody that's been through this and is so deep in the ugly world of knowing all this stuff that we can look at this, you know, kind of subjectively and say, yes, we understand doll collectors and the movies and all of that, and this is wonderful and they're great. But also, we can also see how they came up. And Fred and I were talking that there's a lot of people that find it just creepy how realistic they're looking they are. Fred, can you talk about how you found Tina and her dolls?
Well, I think, Cheri, that you've summarized it perfectly. I mean, that when you start to look at the community that exists online for people who are doll collectors and people who maybe fetishize dolls, that there's a limited number of websites that would come up, and certainly Tina's was one of them. We obviously were looking at this in the context of preparing for a discussion vis-a-vis the Trotla dolls, and you
right.
had alluded to that as well. I think that from the research that I did, and I'm in no way an expert on this particular subset of the internet, but there's clearly a group of people for whom these dolls fill an emotional need, whether or not there's any kind of physical manifestation. There's definitely an emotional attachment, and the more realistic that they are, the greater that attachment can be. And obviously, I think that's one of the compelling things about Tina's dolls is that they are so realistic that it's very easy for people to project onto those dolls what they want.
Well, it is. It is, Fred. And are we in such a society, because we talk about political correctness all the time on Challenging the Rhetoric, right? And is there no place in the world for these dolls that are not meant to be child sex dolls? I think there is. So, again, when I talk about...
there is. Right.
Right. So when I talk about bringing people together on this panel and outside of this panel on this issue, Fred, I think that maybe you and Tina can kind of maybe talk together outside of this show and figure out some solutions for Tina. So, A, she's not red flagged on any cybercrime site as selling sex dolls, child sex dolls at that, but also maybe... and maybe that's not possible, but I think that the two of you need to talk. And I think that maybe you can help her with maybe her presentation on her website so it's not so prolific in the searches. And I'm not quite sure how that'll work because it is dolls that look like children. But I want to jump from that. And Tina, did you want to say something? I'm sorry, before I jump anywhere else. Tina, did you have something that you want to say with response to what Fred or I just said?
Well, I think people, unfortunately, people are, like you said, people are going to project what they want onto these. I've tried doing it all different ways. I've tried listing that I would list IP addresses, which I can access, like I said, through my site stats. It doesn't make any difference. I've tried everything, and it just seems like they find me. All I can do is actually try to kind of screen who I sell my dolls to. That's not always the easiest thing in the world. I always ask if it's a male, is this for your daughter, is this for your granddaughter, so forth. Generally, they're pretty quick to tell me if yes, it's for so-and-so, and then I feel a little better about it. I actually turned somebody down yesterday that was
that's what I was going to say. You just had a situation.
Yeah. He actually came out and said, no, this is for me. I want to be able to play with this doll and pose it. And I just had red flags, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't, I don't do those kinds of dolls anymore, so I don't, that's the size that he was wanting, basically, because it was very specific. And I said, sorry, I don't do that size anymore, and I cut him off, and that was it, because he'd been pestering me for probably a couple of weeks off and on. And the lesson is I can just ignore them. Eventually, if I get the red flags going up in my head, I can just ignore them. So, it's just something that, and honestly, my biggest fear is that someday they're going to raid a pedophile's house and find one of my dolls, and it just to feel that I have somehow contributed to that makes me feel terrible.
Well, Tina, let me just tell you that I have 3 adult children, 2 of which have children. I have 2 grandbabies, and it's kind of the rule because I have such a huge social media following that I don't tag my children and my grandbabies. I don't post pictures of my grandbabies. I think maybe a total of 3 pictures I've posted in many, many years, and those were with permission, like at the birth of my new granddaughter or something like that, because as Fred can attest to, and we're not going to go to Fred because I want to jump over to Sue and then Michael and then Lynn, and kind of in that order because I want to ask everybody a question here with regards to child sex dolls and sex dolls, okay? Because I just recently wrote an article, which is how I came across Tina to begin with, and that was, is your face on a sex doll? There is no oversight in these companies. I've spoken to Real Doll, Biz Creations LLC, and I've done copious amounts of research, as has Fred. I've spoken to Mark Zaid, a regular guest on my show, who is the National Security Attorney for the United States. The thing is that we have certain rights, okay? We have certain rights to our privacy, but when it comes to our name and our likeness, whether we're a celebrity or not, most of those laws apply to advertising and promotion. And what I have discovered just in the last few days is that pretty much any of these companies, and there are so many of these companies for kid dolls and adult dolls alike, they could, in fact, some of these dolls are going for $60,000 or more, and they could if they wanted to, and maybe they are. I would imagine. I don't want to make an accusation, but I would imagine that they are for the very rich people in the world that are spending even more than $60,000, okay, and putting custom faces on. And when I was doing my searches about custom dolls, is how I came across Tina. Tina, you were for a time doing kind of custom faces. So I want to ask you, if you don't mind sharing how you did that, so that we can go then to Michael and Sue and then forward on kind of opinions on how that all works, because, we can sue people, but we don't have a legal right necessarily to win that lawsuit.
Well, I use pre-done molds. I don't mold the face. They're pre-done mold, and then basically you can customize it to what you want: eyes, hair, skin color, details, things like that. So, and I've kind of streamlined that over the years. I just do
What medium are the dolls' faces and bodies?
They're vinyl, and they're predominantly vinyl, and then they have like a cloth mid-body that, and they have an armature in them so that they can be posed.
I'm not sure if we lost you, Tina, but you cut out. I just want to let the listener know that Tina's dolls, yes, they're posable, but please don't forget that many of Tina's dolls have been in television and movies, and so they're meant to be posable as well. Tina, are you still with us, or did you drop?
Yeah. No, I'm here. Okay. It's kind of crackly, but I'm here.
Is what I said correct about being posable? Because to a lot of people listening without thinking about it are like,
Yes, to a degree. They're dolls. They're not going to have a human skeleton, so they're not going to work exactly the same way. But to a degree, yes, they are. They can hold things, and their arms and legs can be posed in different poses. So.
Okay, so on that note, I have Frederick Lane for about 15 minutes more. He's only with us for an hour tonight. I want to jump over to Sue, who's been relatively quiet, and I would just your opinion, Sue, and Tina, no harm, no foul. I just want to hear people who, Sue and Michael particularly, and Michelle, their opinion as somebody who has been sexually abused, and kind of what their thoughts are on your dolls, if you don't mind. So, Sue?
Yeah. When I think of this, I mean, it's just such a long list of questions that go through my mind. Are these done from photographs? And can they lift photographs? I mean, we've all posted pictures of ourselves. I mean, it's all public. That's all public information. So, how much do you start to question, what's happening to your pictures that you post on Facebook or whatever? But when you start to think about it, what if it's my kid? What if this doll is being created with my kid's face to some pedophile specifications with a little soccer uniform, and this is what they're using them for? Is it going to come down to just a matter of copyright infringement? If you lift a picture that's not yours and use it on one of these dolls, and how many dolls are going to be created before you even find out about it? So are we going to be able to keep up with, on legal terms, are we going to be able to keep up with being able to go after them?
Well, you know what, Sue? I completely agree with you, because as I was doing my research, it did not seem that there was any real accountability kind of across the board for the most part. It seemed like if I had enough money with any company and I wanted to have a doll, whether it was a child doll or an adult doll, made with a specific image. And now let me just say this to the listener, and then I'm going to go straight to Fred and then Michael. Sorry, Michael, but Fred's going to leave us, so I want to get a final thought from him on this specific topic, and Trotla and penis dolls and kind of how that coalesces together. But the reality is that there are some people, I mean, there's little action figures that you can have. I wrote the article. It's on sicknessofsilence.com, sicknessofsilence.org. You can see it, that you can send in photos and they'll make an action figure. I mean, with a 3D printed action figure. Now, I'm not seeing a stopgap there. Can I just send that in for anybody I want? And if so, then these companies need to have some other assurance to the public that what they're doing is not pedophilic. Fred, can you give us a final thought on the whole child sex dolls and talk on Trotla? And please plug your book, and thank you for coming.
Well, certainly a pleasure to be here as always, Cheri. Look, the last thought I'd leave you with is that this area of misappropriation of image is really complicated, and we need to have much better rules and regulations about it. There's starting to be some laws with respect to inappropriate images that are misused, but I think the concern that everyone has raised about the potential threat that a photo on your Facebook feed could wind up being used in this way is in fact very real. I'm currently working on a new book, the Cybertraps book, Cybertraps for Expecting Moms and Dads, which will be out later this spring. And one of the things that I'm really arguing for is that parents should wait as long as possible before posting any images of their kids, partly because of this risk, but also partly to give kids the ability to define themselves online rather than stepping into something that has existed for 10 or 12 or 15 years. So I think that that's very important.
Wait, Fred,
privacy.
Fred,
yes.
Fred, wait. Before you finish that, I have to address what you said about your new book, okay, for expectant mothers and stuff and new parents.
Yes.
Because you and I have discussed this a few months back. There was a news story that came out, and it was talking about, okay, I had baby monitors for my babies, okay, and it was kind of rudimentary at the time. They have baby monitors now that are video, and there was a story out several months ago about that they have, in fact, actually been hacked. They've been hacked. Of course. There are pedophiles watching your baby monitors of your infant children, and Michael can, even though he don't remember infancy per se, he can talk to you what that means. But go ahead and finish your thought, Fred.
Well, yeah, look, and just to be clear, Cheri, not everybody who does that is in fact a pedophile. Some of them are just hackers, and some of them are just people trying to freak out the parents. But it's obviously a real risk. The closing thought that I'll leave you with is that, if there's any kind of commercial appropriation of someone's image, that is almost universally prohibited by law. It's much more challenging if it's not for commercial benefit, just for someone's own personal use. There you might get into some kind of invasion of privacy or infliction of emotional distress or something like that. But those laws vary a great deal from state to state, so it's very, very hard to prosecute a case, even if you found out about it. So, this is a really, really difficult area of the law. I think that Tina has done exactly the right thing by saying, I'm just not going to do that anymore, because it really it raises some very challenging questions about whether or not the individual submitting the image has the right to that image. And, then, of course, to what purpose is that doll being put? So I think that, the thing about all of this stuff is that we are just beginning to really appreciate all of the psychological aspects of sexuality. And one of the things about the Internet is that it is allowing the coalescing of communities much more easily than ever happened before. When I was a kid, there probably would not have been a doll lovers community, but now the Internet makes it possible for them not only to find each other, but then to find manufacturers. So the Internet is this amazing source of information that raises some really profound questions about the nature, about human nature and human sexuality. And these are the things that we need to sort out. And with that, I will leave you all.
I was just going to say, Fred, that there is no doubt that somebody that is a suffering pedophile, okay, and I'm really sorry you're going to miss the latter half of this conversation because we're going to go kind of deep in that in a medical way, but I think that there's no doubt that somebody that is a true blue pedophile or a hebephile or a thubophile or any of those under the minors, that they experience a certain sort of loneliness. And we were talking about lonely people in general with porn, and there are certain people that are far from lonely that just enjoy their porn, okay? But there is a lonely aspect that has to come with this psychological and, in my opinion, physiological problem with pedophiles particularly. Fred, thank you so much. Did you want to plug an upcoming book or?
No, just folks can go to my website, fredericklane.com. Everything is there. I really love talking with you guys. I look forward to next month.
Yes, next month, April 7th, first Thursdays every month. Fred will be back. He is a regular panelist here. Thank you, Fred, so much. I'm going to go straight in real quickly to the latest headlines, child sexual abuse headlines over the past month. First and foremost, let me say major kudos to Spotlight. Spotlight just won an Oscar. I could care less about Hollywood and the entertainment industry in general, but I was very much watching and very much paying attention and very much praying and hoping that it would get the kudos that it deserves. That movie, it could have gone deeper, there's no question there, but that movie did something, and we have an opportunity, all of us on this panel, all of us listening, everybody listening to a download, and everybody we share with. We have an opportunity to capitalize on this particular attention right now. And, yes, it's about the Vatican and all those churches. And so I want to tell everybody about a website. There's a website that is really, really cool. It's called takepart.com. And if you go to takepart.com/spotlight, not only is information about the movie itself there, but there is a map that's worldwide reporting on the Catholic Church sexual abuses alone, and your mind will be blown. It is, I mean, just in the Boston Globe story and what came out of that, we're talking 120,000 victims, okay? This is something that is so deep within churches. Michael can speak on churches in general, not necessarily just the Catholic Church, but this is a problem. We go to God, we look for solace, we look for healing, but we're not looking to be abused or have our children abused, and it happens all the time, just like it happens with teachers and it happens with parents, because as I said in the opening, it's very rarely is it a stranger. So some of these headlines we're talking about, the first couple have to do with the Catholic Church. A top Vatican cardinal in Australia says that senior clergy lied about childhood sexual abuse. Well, obviously we're seeing that roll out all over the world. In America, 2 Pennsylvania bishops hid hundreds of child sexual abuse cases, okay? Hid hundreds. They covered it up. It was set out to cover up hundreds of these cases by more than 50 priests, okay? That's just in Pennsylvania. And so off the precinct, there has been a call for a permanent tribunal of child support to support child sexual abuse victims. The UK government has called for this permanent tribunal. I highly agree with it. We need something like that here in America. I want to say the next headline here is there is a man who is 30 years old. He's a divorcee, a heavy equipment operator, and in half a dozen years, he became one of the most prominent citizens in this little area that he lived, and he became elected a mayor, okay? He became elected a mayor of this town, and then he got arrested earlier this month, and he was charged with 5 counts of sexual abuse involving 2 children, ages 9 and 14, of those 5 counts. Again, outside of the country, in Rotherham, child sexual abuse victims, they're taking the police to court. They're taking the police to court. And sometimes we have to do that, okay? 65 victims, and not things are being done. They're taking the police to court, as well they should. There was a man jailed for sexual abuse publications, a 40-year-old in Waikato, and in the Hamilton District Court, 3 years ago and 2 months, he got 3 years and 2 months imprisonment for exporting, importing, possessing, and distributing over 900 child sexual abuse publications using the Internet, okay? Using the Internet, over 900 child sexual abuse publications. It doesn't matter if he abused a child. Child pornography is crime scene imagery. It's not a victimless crime. It is in perpetuity. You can never get rid of it because of the Internet. These children that, in Frederick's book from a while back when the Internet porn thing exploded, he has a book called Obscene Prophets. And in that book, you'll see how this kind of came to be with Internet pornography. And the same goes for child pornography. Things that people had in their stash before the Internet became a thing and there were scanners, well, that's how it exploded so suddenly, so rapidly, is they just went and scanned all that stuff and they had a huge business all of a sudden. It's still happening, people. There was a BC man accused of sexually abusing his children. He got granted time to appeal after an expert witness was called a fraud. Now, we know expert witnesses can be great. Expert witnesses can also be bought and paid for. And that's sad to say, but it's true. We talk about false memories and stuff like that, and I will not deny that there is a possibility that exists. But I am on the record for saying that people do know what they know. They do remember what they remember. And if you were abused as a child, you full well know what happened to you. There were 6 arrested and charged with sex crimes against children in Snohomish County. Washington State Patrol's Missing and Exploited Children Task Force arrested 6 people during a 4-day operation. And these people that were targeted were explicitly sexually exploiting children. Okay, these are all recent cases. There was an Alabama man that was indicted on child pornography and sex tourism charges. Sex tourism charges. Are you kidding me? In Alabama? Highly conservative state. All right, so, I mean, those are just some of the latest sex headlines, and then I want to get to one more. And thank you, Michelle Forbes, for making sure that this was on my radar. But in Houston, there was a man who offered sex with his 4-year-old, with a sedated 4-year-old on Craigslist. His ad said, "Come sleep with Daddy's little girl." Come sleep with Daddy's little girl. Now, there are a lot of problems in this country, and the economy is certainly one of the biggest. It's certainly one of the biggest, and if Fred were here, he can attest to the fact with the industry, because of the Internet, that people are realizing that they can make all these profits. There are so many people that are so hard up. Do you think they would be, all of them? Do you think they would be as hard up if the economy wasn't so bad? Michael, go straight to you.
Okay. Well, first off, I want to say to Tina, I don't feel this is your fault that people are violating your creative art. That is out of your control, and I can understand that you would feel badly. But again, if I can just say to you, I don't think it's your fault. Again, I just go back to how do we prevent child abuse? So these, folks aren't grown up to become pedophiles, so that we stop it, we end it, and eventually all the pedophiles just pass away from old age. I just find it sad that human beings are using child dolls and adult dolls for their sexual gratification. So, but again, I don't think that's your fault, and I'm sorry that your work is being used in that way. And Cheri, to your questions on all the other, where would you like me to address? Which part?
Well, let's start with where you just left off, Michael. Because you were abused starting in infancy, okay? You don't have a benchmark. I mean, I barely have a benchmark. Sue and certainly Michelle has a better benchmark as far as the survivors on the panel tonight. But if your abusers, if your parents had dolls, not penis dolls, but if they had trotler dolls, okay, or something like that, if they actually had dolls and it stopped them from abusing you, is that a good thing? That's a hard question. I realize that, and that's kind of where we're going to go for the next 40 minutes.
And I'm not trying to be, I don't pass moral judgment. I don't know, but I just think there is a disconnect if a human being has to do that with a doll. So for myself, my honest answer, I think something's wrong there. There's something definitely wrong. I think that needs to be addressed, and I go back to what I said, ending childhood abuse. So if someone else disagrees and they think a doll is okay, I just think it's sad. I don't know if wrong. I feel the same way about pornography. As a human being, as a guy, was there once upon a time seeing some things that were not exciting? Of course, but now when I learned as I got older that most folks in the pornography industry are all survivors, I don't want to watch that. So it's not that I'm taking some moralistic viewpoint that I'm against sex. I just don't want to see someone exploited. So that's where I'm coming from with this. I just want to see the darn abuse end. So,
Michael, I agree with you. I do, and I don't know that child sex dolls are anywhere near the answer. I personally think that somebody that might acquiesce to a doll and think that they're helping themselves, I think just like any other kind of addiction or compulsion, obsession, paraphilia, which is, a mental aspect of pedophilia, I think that they're going to want the real thing eventually, and I think that the dolls might actually exacerbate that. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on it. Lynn's been pretty quiet.
That is what I
think.
I think that too, Cheri.
Ahead,
I just think it would be a stopgap measure for a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might have some sort of a pause, and personally, I think that with the internet, with technology, there is a desensitization. There is a disconnection, and I think that if people were more prone to use dolls and such, I think that human element of any kind of care would be far removed. And I personally, again, I'm no expert, but I personally think that those who spend their time with the child sex dolls would be more apt to have more violent abuses against children when they do act out. Now, again, I'm not an expert. I want to jump over real quick to Lynn Thompson. Lynn, checkers for trafficking. This is kind of a little bit outside of that element, but I got to ask you, as a human being who's been highly involved in this sort of stuff, what do you think on this topic of child sex dolls? What do you think on the topic of anything that can be done to cut down child sex trafficking and child sexual abuse?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that any time you are selling someone else, whether it's an infant, a child, or an adult, for a profit, whether you're selling them for pornography purposes, whether you're selling them for strip clubs, whether you're selling them for whatever part of the sex industry or for labor, that is a trafficking victim. I don't care what age they are. If they're commercially sexually exploited or labor exploited, they're a trafficking victim. So, and pornography has been shown to have a direct link to traffickers and to trafficking, because at some point the pornography isn't enough. You have to have the actual child, and the younger they go into pornography, the younger the pornographic images, the younger they decide that they need the actual person in order to fulfill the fantasy. Rachel Moran was trafficked for many years, prostituted and trafficked up in Ireland. She wrote a book called Paid For, and she talks about how perverted the entire sex industry is when you have a buyer and the person who is supplying the service. And so when you get part of the sexual dysfunction we have in our country today is directly linked to pornography, because the more pornography you use, the more you are unable to actually have a fulfilling, real relationship with someone else, because it goes more and more into fantasy and more into what you think it should be. So I think the dolls themselves are not going to stop child sexual abuse. Maybe they're going to use it for a second, but for a little bit, but not for long, because then they're going to need more and more in order to fulfill what the fantasy is now becoming. And anybody that is selling, yeah.
I was going to say that was a really great answer, and I want you to finish that, but I do want you to know that as soon as you finish that, Sue Shugarts has a question for you regarding underage prostitution.
Okay, Lynn, I have a question on this with the trafficking. Right now there are underage girls out there that have been trafficked. They're out there prostituting. This is not a choice for them. This is what they have to do. What are your feelings on the legalities of it? They are being arrested and can be arrested for prostitution, even though they're part of trafficking. And what do you hear on this through your organization?
According to the federal definition, any minor who is selling sex is a human trafficking victim. The difficulty is that not all police across the United States have had the training to be able to understand what human trafficking is. Many times when we started TAT, truckers would be making calls, and then police departments would not respond because they hadn't had human trafficking training. All they knew was, this is a prostitute. A 12-year-old, this is a prostitute. But so now when we do what are called coalition builds, where we'll bring in law enforcement from every level, from the FBI, the AG's office, local police, sheriff's department, state patrol, as well as representatives from the trucking industry, into an area for a half-a-day training where they listen to they're trained by a trafficking survivor. They listen to a panel of experts. They get an HT, Human Trafficking 101. They're all given the same page of information, more or less, and then they work on how they can close gaps so that traffickers can't get through them anymore. One of the gaps in the United States for human trafficking is that not all police have been trained. So that has to be stopped.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking on the question is, how is it being handled? And through education.
Lynn's organization, Sue. Lynn's organization works with a lot of different local, state, and federal different kind of law enforcement government entities out there. It is one of the things that I certainly admire about Lynn's organization, particularly because she really found a niche into this problem here. Lynn, can you talk a little bit about this companionship you have with law enforcement?
Well, from the beginning, the FBI has been very excited about our organization because of the fact that truckers are all over the place. And travel plazas are all over the place. And so when they know that these truckers or these travel plazas are being trained with our materials, then they're able to work with them, sometimes in undercover means. But and then in Ohio, the state patrol is using all of our materials to go out and they hit every trucking company in Ohio as well as every travel plaza. And then they're also, starting in July, if you want a CDL license, you have to go through our training as part of the training for your CDL. But we also go, like I'm going to be going in May to train 100 law enforcement in the state of Virginia. We have someone going next month to train law enforcement in North Carolina. In this month, we're the only nonprofit organization that will have a 15-minute window at an interdiction, a big law enforcement interdiction conference in Reno, Nevada. So we're working really hard, as well as other organizations are working really hard to get the training out there. Oftentimes, and we do it for free. That's part of the problem, is that oftentimes police forces do not have the money allocated in order to get the human trafficking training. But
Lynn, can I interrupt real quick, because I want to correct you. You don't do it for free. You do it at a cost to you, just like I do this at a cost to me. And that is the saddest truth that I can talk about with regard to anybody that's trying to combat anything to do with child sexual abuse or child abuse in general. It's almost always at our cost because people cringe. They don't want to talk about it. They want to pretend it's not happening. It's so real. People think that human trafficking is something that happens somewhere else, if at all. And that's not true. It happens right here in the United States. And I don't mean to go on a soapbox, but it's kind of typical for me at least once per show. And the reality here is, for all of you listening right now live into the downloads, human trafficking is a serious problem. It was not long ago that even I thought, oh, yeah, it's something that happens somewhere else. Oh, it's not a big deal. Yes, it is a big deal. It is a very big deal in the United States, and I'm going to challenge everybody listening to say that it's not just sex offenders doing this sort of stuff. It's people that are hard up for dollars. Lynn, can you address that?
Yeah, there's a percentage of traffickers who are familial. They're selling their own children, whether to get drugs or whether to get money to live on or whatever. So there's that group. But then there are gangs that sell children as well as adults to make money. If you sell a drug one time, that's all you have. You can sell a person 20 to 40 times a night. You can sell them day after day after day, and you could make money. Organized crime is big into trafficking. But there can be individuals. A father, we know of one case where a girl came over to spend the night at her friend's house. The father slipped something into her water, drugged her, raped her, and then began selling her. And a trafficker usually is the definition for trafficking says that they're using force, fraud, and coercion in order to keep control over their trafficking victim. However, when it's a minor, anyone under the age of 18, force, fraud, and coercion do not have to be proven in a court of law. If they are sold for sex or labor, any portion of the sex industry, they are trafficking victims. But it can be just about anybody that decides they're going to make money. A teenage boy may decide, 18 years old or so, may decide he's going to make money by selling his girlfriend. So he'll start out with her as his girlfriend, and pretty soon she'll end up as a trafficking victim. He will either be a gorilla type or he'll be a Romeo type that'll convince her that she needs to be sold or sell herself to someone else and give him the money. Trafficking victims don't get to keep the money. Hello?
Did we lose you, Cheri?
Cheri, are you there?
Oh, I think we lost Cheri. Does anybody
Really?
else have anything to add?
I'm here.
So
I'm here. You didn't lose
okay.
me.
It's back.
But what I was saying that apparently everybody didn't hear is that, Lynn, we're still going to hear from you more before the close of the show. We got a little bit more than 30 minutes. I want to let the listeners know, please do, truly from my heart, please do check out truckersagainsttrafficking.org. This is an amazing organization, and I am so surprised that I'm only recently aware of this. I want to thank Twitter follower Olivia, I don't know much about her, but for turning me on to the fact that truckers are in the know about this problem. Lynn, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. I want to jump over, and I know this seems scattered, but there's so much stuff to cover with each person here. I want to go back over to Tina. Tina, you've heard everything that we've had to say. You've heard all of the bombardment from pedophiles that you've gotten. I want to tell you that I personally, there is a creepy factor about your dolls when I'm thinking about the topic, but I have to tell you artistically, because I am an artist, okay? I am an actual artist. I sketch and draw and stuff, and I come from an art family, and the work that you put into these dolls is pretty freaking phenomenal. And for a true blue doll collector, the appreciation is certainly there. So I applaud you for coming on the show, and I hope that you have not felt attacked in any way. We want to help you to not be bombarded by pedophiles at the same time that you can continue your business. But we need to find a better way to go about this. So with your background, with your master's and stuff, with what Lynn was talking about with child trafficking, with what you heard Frederick talking about, and then the survivors of this, do you have anything like going forward from now, and maybe it's a lot to think about. I totally understand. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but do you see that maybe something better can be done with the presentation of your dolls so that you're not bombarded and so that pedophiles, and I highly suggest, by the way, as I said a couple times, for you and Fred to connect off of the show, and maybe he can help you, because my fear is that you're going to be red flagged by a Fed as somebody that's actually trafficking these dolls, even though you're not. So Can you kind of address that?
Well,
I mean,
honestly,
just so you know, Tina, I totally believe you. I totally believe that your dolls are not child sex dolls. Okay? Yeah. I am on the record. I do not think that Tina's tots, I do not think that Tina's dolls are child sex dolls. Okay? I totally don't. She could be lying to me, but I don't believe that. I don't believe she's lying to any listener right now. So please hear her.
The thing is, I realize that they're looking at my dolls, but they're also looking at other people who do lifelike dolls. They're also looking at people's pictures on the internet, that on Facebook. They're going to find that. Just because my concern obviously is because I see it coming up on my dolls. That I realize those people are out there and they're trying to find those things. My feeling is, and I've had discussions with people about this, why is it not illegal to put in the term child-like sex doll or something in that related to that term? Because we know addiction is progressive, so we know if when you start into drugs, you start one drug and then you go to another drug for a better high. Why is it that it's okay to start with a doll, but then we were astounded when somebody progresses to a real child? That doesn't make sense to me, and I don't know how.
It doesn't. I don't think it makes sense to. I don't think it makes sense to anybody, and I think that the point that you bring up is incredibly important. And this is something I talk on in my regular show, Challenging the Rhetoric, every week on Wednesdays, is that I talk about how technology has impacted so many things so rapidly that the rest of the world hasn't caught up with how to deal with that, and that includes the legal world. And with the Internet and search terms, and I'm an SEO expert. I am an SEO expert, which is probably how I found you. Because what we think as a business owner or somebody that has a product for sale, what we think might be search terms are not how the general public will be searching for them. And very few people that own any sort of business actually understand how search terms work in the Internet. But you know who does is people like Google and Bing and Yahoo and all those search engine giants. They know how it works, and they do have an onus in this. They can do exactly what Tina just said, is they can have some sort of stopgap on certain search terms, and that they're red flags. Tina, I highly encourage you to do what you have posted on your website, to be able to post people's IP addresses when it's pretty relevant, or pretty, certain what they're trying to look for. If you're listening, please go to Tina's Tots -dolls.com, and you can check out her site and her dolls and learn a little bit about her and what she does. And we're going to continue talking, but I do want to jump over real quick right now to Michelle. Can you kind of address technology's part in this?
In the selling of the dolls?
Not just the dolls, but in this whole industry with child sex.
Well, I think it's huge. There's such a bigger pool now because you have the ability to get anything at the press of a button. And like Andrew Turley that you were talking about, the gentleman that was in the article, he was able to sell his child on Craigslist. And, now that there's technology, people could just go out there and sell a child. And I don't think the government can keep up with it. I mean, he was actually caught in a sting that they knew what he was doing. But I think that there's so many of them out there that it is hard for them to keep up at this point.
Michael, how do you feel about that?
Which part? Because I was listening and I'm reading.
Technology, and what our role as survivors and experts, and the world's role, and I can't even speak right now, role as well, particularly search engine giants, like Tina was saying. Why can't they put a stop on people that are specifically searching child sex dolls? Why can't that be a red flag and it goes nowhere?
Oh, there's not only that issue, but there's so many issues that the search engine giants, they're not helping one bit. They do a few things token-wise, but I agree. They could help put a dent in a lot of this, and they're not, because they're being driven by their greed. That's how I feel about it, because there's other issues that they could be helping to stop this, and they have the capability to, as you say, red flag these things. They're not. And I don't want to hear about privacy and everything else. There's certain issues that they know what's going on, and they can help be a part of the solution, but they're part of the problem, because they're part of the silence. They are part of the silence. They're part of the sickness.
And the silence is the disease. The silence is the disease completely. Sue, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. Silence is the disease. If we summarize everything, whether it's sex dolls, whether it's pornography, whether it's trafficking and physical beings, whether it's parents that are selling their children, we have to know there's a demand out there. And it's larger than anybody wants to admit. And keeping silent and not listening to what we're saying is part of the problem. No one wants to admit that this is going on in such expanse. So then it continues, and that is the sickness of the silence. It's not just the victims being silent. It's everybody being silent. It's nobody listening. It's everybody burying their heads in the sand, including the search engines, including the police forces and the government. Nobody wants to admit that this is all going on in such expanse.
Okay, that was really a great answer. I want to jump over to Michelle, and I have the same question for Michelle that I have for the rest of the panelists, and then we're going to start maneuvering to closing the show. I'm going to give each of you about 3 minutes each to opine here on this next question. If you can give, individually, if you can give 2 pieces of constructive advice of where do we go from here, how can we help this problem, And I think that each of you, as I go to you, can address it as far as your personal experience and your personal involvement. So we're going to go straight to Michelle, and she can address how can we do something to be impactful with regards to schools and educators. Michelle.
I think that we need to educate our children better. I think that I talked about this last time. We teach inappropriate touch, which is great. But I think at a certain level we need to teach more than that. Girls don't see it as inappropriate touch once they get to junior and senior high level. They are groomed to love this person so that it doesn't seem like inappropriate touch. I think that we need to educate our parents. I think that our parents, like Sue said, people just, they don't want to look at it. They don't want to think that that's going to happen to their kid. They think if their child is good enough, if they're smart enough, if they're in sports, they think that won't happen. And it happens. I was in sports. I was a good kid. I had good parents. I think there needs to be so much more education, and I think we need to educate our educators. I think that they need to know where to go when a kid is in that situation. I think they protect their peers a lot, and they sometimes don't listen to the child. And I think just all around there needs to be better education in the school system and in the home.
I completely agree with you, Michelle. I completely agree with you, and I think that Andrea Clemens and Kids Safe Foundation and people like Fred with Cybertraps for Educators are doing a really good, honorable job at trying to educate people within the schools. Unfortunately, the problem is so prolific, and the silence is even more deafening. And per capita, oh my gosh, the population is continuously expanding, and so between that and technology, I'm not sure exactly what the answer is. But for Lynn Thompson of Truckers Against Trafficking, Lynn, if you had two pieces of advice of what we can do now on your expertise, what can we do right now to start staunching this flow?
One of the things is that we need to help people to quit objectifying females, women, girls. They need to be able, the more they objectify them, the more it's just this body rather than a person, the more they feel they can just use that body or abuse that body. The same with children, and understanding the sanctity of that life and that the dignity of that life, whether they're in school or whether they're out of school. There is it doesn't matter what they look like, how they act, they are a human being, and they need to be seen that way rather than just disposable. We have a tendency in our country to look at certain people as simply disposable or beneath us. We put them in, we have our own caste system, so to speak, or class system. And those people that we look at as a different class, it doesn't matter what happens to them. And that's how traffickers and that's how pedophiles are able to do so much damage. So we need to quit looking at people in different classes. We need to quit looking at them as disposable. We need to quit objectifying women.
Lynn, what you said is extremely important for everybody listening to understand is that there is no socioeconomic, there is no race bias when it comes to human trafficking. Okay, there just isn't. This happens to anybody. It doesn't matter whether you're white, blue, or yellow. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, because there are as many rich, to the public looking happy children that are desolate and neglected and even abused as there are poor ones. So thank you for those thoughts, Lynn. Michael Skinner, I want to say something to you, Michael. I took very, very to heart and very seriously something you said on the last roundtable, and that was we can talk about this all the time, but when are we going to do something? Okay, and that is really what tonight's show has been about, and that's what drove me for tonight's show. So, Michael, what two things do you suggest from your expertise and your background that we can do that can be actionable?
I think it just starts in the neighborhood, the community, but I truly believe in, with the public service announcements to address the epidemic that this is. Now, we know this, and a lot of other people know it, but they push it under the rug. So there should be safe zones. The school, churches, libraries, there should be posters on the walls, billboards everywhere, and on the Internet where kids are hanging out. McDonald's, in the churches, the libraries, signs, if you're being abused, the safe touch, all this stuff, but there has to be real safe places where kids and adults can reach out to. This has to be looked at as a public health issue, just like the anti-smoking, addressing cancer. There's all kinds. We're told we need mammograms for guys. The prostate checks, all that stuff, and then so that's that piece of it. Then also, the second part of that is the impact of abuse on not only the victim survivor, but what this is doing to the community. Tie in the money. If people don't want to look at this, look at how it's going to save their tax dollars. We would empty the prisons if we address this. We would cut the divorce rate in half. So every one of these folks who want to get on their little soapbox, how they want to preserve the family and all the rest of the BS that they're spouting, well, put their money where their mouth is and start doing this. Address these things, and the family will heal. So those are a couple things I would like to see. And those are real things that we can do, and this is where the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsoft, all those folks, they can put their money to this. The Koch brothers and all the rest of these people, take some of those millions and start doing this. They want to say they want to make America and the world great again. Well, darn it, they can start with this.
I completely agree with you, Michael, and I challenge everybody on the panel tonight, as well as those listening live into the download, to be a part of potentially a new piece of legislation that maybe we can all put together with regards to the search engines here. I think that is something that I don't know how that works, but I will look into it. But I think that is something that has come out of tonight's show, particularly from Tina's comments with regards to what has happened to her with the dolls, that I think it's very relevant. And I don't understand why. I truly do not understand why search engines, other than the monetary, the greed, okay, that they can't realize that they have not just a huge part in allowing this to happen, but a huge part in actually stopping this, because technology is one of the number one leading precursors to the child pornography, to the trafficking and all of that. This is how they communicate. This is how they do business and network and all of that. And if we could use the search engines and a piece of legislation, okay, and I'm all about freedom of speech and I'm all about anti-government stuff, so everybody listening and say, oh, but Cheri, this is important enough. This is our future. And before I go on my soapbox any further, I want to go over to Tina. Tina, if you could do two things that can change this outlook, what would they be? What can we do?
Well, I think first of all that there seems to be a lot of denial going on as far as understanding addictions and how addictions work, and part of it, and I like that I've heard this where people feel that it's just a doll. It's okay. It's okay if it's a doll as long as they you don't progress to a child. You don't understand how addictions work, but you do progress to that. So part of it is our legislators need to understand how addictions progress, and that there is a direct link between going from point A to point B. That would be the first thing. Is our legislators need to be better educated on how something like this works. Second, there needs to just flat out be tighter laws that when somebody plugs in child sex doll, there needs to be a way of tracking that down and assuming that they are going to go on farther with it than that. So
that was a great answer. That was really a great answer, Tina, and I want to explore that right at the last minutes of the show. Sue, over to you. Two things. Your abuse started when you were 8 years old, being groomed by a neighbor. Mm-hmm. Okay, two things from your perspective that we can do right now.
You do right now. Education is always your best bet, but We can tell people, we can tell our
Pause.
kids, you know, how to.
I'm sorry, that's like my keyword. Wait, Sue, I'm sorry. Pause is kind of like my keyword, I guess, because I say it too often.
Okay.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but sometimes each of you say something that I have to interject on because we have to address what you just said. When we talk about education, education is static. People have to want to learn in order to learn. So let's take education off the table for a minute. Give me two really, something we can grasp onto that is not static.
It is not static. I think that from the beginning, we just need to pull our heads out of the sand. We have to know as parents, you know, this stuff is going on. It is not just in some other city. We need to talk to our kids. They need a place to go. They need somebody to tell. If they can't tell parents, then they do need a hotline. They do need teachers or clergy or somebody there that they can address this with and not carry this with them. Those are the things that we need to be working on. But everybody needs to be on the same page, and we can't ignore that this is happening on such a broad scale.
That is really great because it's about ignoring, and the people that ignore are the people that haven't grasped what has happened to them, or the people that has never been touched by this. And those numbers are actually fewer in the long end result. They're actually fewer than the reality. But we know that I'm going to be 48 next month. Okay, I'm going to be 48. I'm a grandma 2 times over, and I've been talking about this for a long time. But I know people my age that have never spoken about this, and it happened to them. And so I think, me personally, I think that it starts with the people that have suffered through this. I think that we need to suck it up, and we need to start talking about it, and we need to take the arrows and the darts as they come, and that's hard. Before I start rounding into the close of the show, I kind of have a question for everybody here, and it's like 30 seconds each to answer, if you don't mind. And I'm going to start with Michael, actually, and I'll kind of go around from there. My question is this. Based on the fact that medical technology, just like the rest of technology, has so far advanced, that we now know that sex offenders in general, this is not going to be all pedophiles, but sex offenders in general have something going on visibly with the gray matter of their brain, and sometimes the white matter as well. I think it's actually predominantly the white matter and sometimes also the gray matter of their brain that's visually identifiable in MRI brain scans. Okay, so I'm totally anti-Orwellian. If you've listened to Challenging the Rhetoric, you know this. But is the answer, could it be an answer when we're talking about using tech to our advantage? Should children be given an MRI at birth and then labeled and predisposed as far as, on paper that they could go this way? Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely
not.
Now,
before you answer, hold on a minute. Before you answer, Michael, before you answer and before anyone else answers that, let's put into perspective our own experiences and whether or not any of these things that I start bringing up could potentially make a change with what happened to us. So go ahead.
No, that's scary. That would frighten the hell out of me, because just given my background, what I came from, it was already assumed that I was going to grow up to be an abuser, if not, sexually as a male. I was going to be a domestic violence, all these other things, life of crime. No, I would not want to be labeled as a child. I did everything that I could, and I'm sure my brain shows all kinds of trauma and damage to it, but I still think we can heal. Look at in the mental health world, the people that are labeled with all, the schizophrenia, the bipolar. Stop peeling away all those labels and go to their root causes. It's from the trauma in their lives. So no, that would scare the living hell out of me.
Yeah, it would scare me as well, and just so the listeners know, that is kind of where I stand, and I'll go a little bit more into that in the close. Sue, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think they don't. First of all, they don't know enough, and they're looking at someone who has offended and who has been, living this kind of weird life. They haven't measured from birth and how that develops, and in the ways that develops, we don't know. I do think we know. I think we can know a lot younger tendencies, and I do think there are probably cognitive things that they can address in growing up as far as sexuality, and this is all part of that. But no, I don't think that we label someone from birth as damaged and dangerous or anything like that. That's just like Michael said, that is terrifying.
Yeah, well, technology is both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Lynn Thompson, I'm going to go over to you. And Lynn, I want to modify the question for you. And there's no right or wrong answer here. You're not going to be judged. From your opinion and everything that you do, if there was a medical test right now that could test everybody in the United States and it could determine whether they would be a child trafficker or not, is that a good thing?
No, I don't think so, because I think there are just, as Michael and Sue have already pointed out, there are so many different things that can happen to somebody. I don't think you can predict, and I think that there are just so many different factors that can make a change in someone's life that would alter them from what a test might show. There's so many people who are told, for instance, prior to having a child, that this child is going to be born with all of these defects, and that they have to have an abortion, or they should have an abortion, and they don't, and the child is born perfectly healthy. I just don't think you can, and I call it the God factor. I just don't think you go on a test like that to say this is a predetermined thing here.
Yeah, if I can just jump in quickly, I agree.
Sure.
Because I've studied history, and back in World War II, scientists, the doctors, they were quoting the medical research that was telling how inferior blacks were and how that they couldn't operate, the guns on the naval ships at night because their eyesight was less than a white man. So, yeah, this is scary stuff.
It's very, very, very scary stuff. It's crazy scary stuff. Michelle, do you have a thought on that?
I do. All of us that are survivors on here, frankly, are damaged. We all are in that situation, but I don't think a test could ever show you. Michael is a testimony alone to you can't judge the human spirit. I mean, he came out of something and became the wonderful human being that he is. What if he'd been labeled as a child? I don't think you can judge that by a test. It's scary.
I agree, Michelle. And we have a little bit more time. That went a little quicker than I thought for that last round of questions. So I'm going to pose another question. If we did have a test that suddenly became arbitrarily as part of the norm, like the RFID chip that is becoming more and more normalized all the time, okay? If we suddenly have something that happens at birth with children that is a test and this predisposed labeling should occur, and I'm saying should, not because I think it should, because I don't think it should, but if it did occur, then is that not just going to be a new fight in this battle and more noise in the topic? Michael, straight to you.
Oh, boy, I just think there's so many things to address. I don't agree with this label, and they can't do it. They don't have the technology. It's impossible. They can tell us that they can, but that's a load of baloney.
Well, I agree, Michael. My fear is that at some point here, very soon, and this is a broad timeline because I think it might happen even sooner. But I think somewhere in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to be looking at something like this, and I think that for us that are trying to combat this, we realize that this is not a good thing, and I think that we will be muted when this happens, as if we didn't care and as if somehow we perpetuated this. And so this is kind of a good show to go on the record that pretty much nobody here agrees with that kind of profiling. Profiling happens whether it has to do with race or sociological, socioeconomical, backgrounds for a plethora of reasons. I mean, that is sad but true. People are profiled for lots of things every single day in this world, not just in the United States. So how can we get a jump on this potential profiling? Profiling, mind you, of people that are potentially abusers to the extent of what we have suffered, or for the experts here of what they know others have suffered. How can we move forward? I'm going to go right to Michelle really quick, then Sue, and then Lynn. How can we move forward? We each have like 20 seconds each. If that were to come to be in the next 10 years or so, how do we go on the record now, and how do we start a process now to make sure that doesn't happen? Michael?
I think with what we're doing, it just what we were talking about earlier on how to address things right now. Let's go back to where this all starts, because no one can predict how a child is going to grow up. We don't know. So these tests, yes, and I know that they'll be pushing hard to say that they can do this, but it's up to us in society to start waking up and address this. I guess I would go back to my answers earlier. This needs to be a public health epidemic awareness, and this can't be determined by some simple test, and it's going to weed out who are going to be pedophiles and abusers. When I had to deal with the post-traumatic stress and depression, I had to listen to doctors and psychologists and therapists telling me I'm mentally ill now and I'll never work again, I'll never be in music again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I had all that profile crap given to me. And so, no, it can't. It's false. It's wrong.
I agree with you, Michael. Tina, you want to address this specifically. Tina, you have like 20 seconds. Go for it, hon.
Okay, I do. I'm Native American. My DNA says I should be an alcoholic. I have literally lost every single male member of my family, my dad, my grandfather, my uncle, all the way down to alcoholism. I make a purposeful choice not to drink. Everybody has free will, and everybody makes choices. You have to make the choice that keeps you from going into your addiction. If you have a problem, you go get help for it. If you have a problem physically, you go to your doctor. Get help. That's what I need to say. Don't give in to it. Go get help.
Go get help. Go get help. And if you go to sicknessofsilence.com or sicknessofsilence.org, if you have any kind of pedophilic feelings, if you're fighting those, we all know, everybody on this panel and most of the listeners know that not every pedophile actually acts out and commits a crime and an abuse on a child. And you can stop yourself. We understand that there are a lot of psychological and physiological issues going on here, but please check out the website or at least go and Google Stop It Now. There are answers for you. There definitely are answers for you. We need people that have this in them to help be a part of the solution. You have 10 seconds, Michelle. A final thought?
I think that the more that you speak, the more that it's out there, the less that predators have the opportunity to strike, because people are more aware of what's going on. So survivors just have to keep speaking and keep talking, and people need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And as far as, stopping the testing, I think we would advocate for that would actually perpetuate the problem, in my opinion, because then you let your guard down, in a way, if you think you've solved the problem. We need to talk more about what happens. Like Michael said, go back to the roots. Survivors need to talk about what happened to them and not be afraid to talk about it with anyone and everyone that they can talk to.
I challenge the listeners, it's not the survivors that need to talk about it. It's the people that have never dealt with it that need to listen to it. I want to thank Sue Shugarts, Michael Skinner, Frederick Lane, Michelle Forbes, Tina McCulloch, and Lynn Thompson for joining me here tonight on Sickness of Silence. We are down to mere seconds, so I want everybody to please go to sicknessofsilence.com or .org and check out the website. Lots there for you. Next Wednesday is the regular Challenging the Rhetoric show. We're going to be picking up again with Frederick Lane, specifically talking about pornography and the Internet industry. First Thursday, April 7th, SOS will be back again. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate every ear and every share and every like.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.